Hello and welcome once more to Conscious TV. I'm Iain McNay and my guest today is Leonard Jacobson. Hello Leonard.
Hello Iain.
So Leonard has got some books. I've only got two of them here, but it's Journey into Now and Words from Silence. And if you look at his website you can find other books. And he's got quite a fascinating story, and he's also got a really good teaching. So we're going to find out obviously more about him and his story, and we'll look at his teaching which actually came out of his story. So Leonard, just take us through events. I know we had dinner together last night and you were saying you're Australian originally and you were a lawyer.
Yes, back in, I forget the year, but yes, I was a barrister in Melbourne, complete with wig and gown, for about 5 or 6 years before I realised that that was not my true calling, and then I just quit that profession.
And you also said to me that when you quit, you didn't have anything else to go to.
Right, that's true. I just knew that it wasn't for me, and it took me quite a while to accept that, come to terms with that. And after I resigned from the bar, I walked home. It was about a 1 hour walk, and when I got home I felt quite depressed and wondered to myself, oh, what have I done? What will I do next? I had no clue. But I knew two things would guide me, two words would guide me, and those two words were creativity and communication. I knew those two words had to be a part of my future, but I didn't know how that would manifest. And so slowly it manifested into one thing and then later into another thing.
Because you actually worked as a copywriter, didn't you, for an advertising agency for a time?
Right, after I resigned from the bar, not knowing what to do, I thought, well, creativity and communication, I could get a job as a copywriter. And so I wrote down the names of about 10 or 11 of the leading advertising agencies in Melbourne. I wrote a whole bunch of mock ads, TV, radio, print, and I went and knocked on the door of all these creative directors. I made appointments, and the first 10 thought I was crazy giving up law to be a copywriter, and I kind of agreed with them. Anyway, the 11th one looked at me and said, well, I think you're crazy and I'll give you a job. So I finished up getting a job as a writer for the largest advertising agency in Melbourne at that time. But after about 1.5 years of working there and quite enjoying it, I also knew that wasn't it. So I left there not knowing what would come next. It seems to be a pattern of mine to leave things not knowing what would come next. Anyway, that led to my first awakening in 1981.
So what was the feeling inside you? Can you remember the feeling? Was it one of just general dissatisfaction, or was there specific things you feel didn't work in your life?
It was more a general dissatisfaction and a kind of inner knowing that this is not my true calling, this is not what I'm meant to be doing with my life, but not knowing what I was meant to be doing with my life. So it took a little bit of courage to take that leap into the unknown and really not know what would come next.
Yeah, because a lot of people have that feeling.
Yes, I know, and a lot of them don't act upon it, but my feeling is if you act upon it, and it's really what you need to be acting upon, you're responding to a deeper level within yourself, then my sense is that it will always work out.
Yeah. So you went to a retreat. This was December 81. You decided to go to a 7-day retreat.
Yes, it was vacation time in Australia.
Yes.
I had no clue what to do with myself, so I thought, well, I'll sign up for this 7-day retreat. I didn't know anyone who was attending. I didn't know the group leader, but I thought, well, it's a nice way to spend 7 days over the Christmas period. And it was during those 7 days, during that retreat, actually towards the end of the retreat, that I had my first awakening, which radically changed everything in my life, almost overnight. So that was very exciting, very profound, very life transforming.
Well, you've left out a lot of detail, which is actually, I think, integral in I don't know if you want me to fill in the detail or you will, but
Well, I can. It just ask me the questions that otherwise I don't quite know what to say.
yeah, I think, well, again, one of the things that you stressed when we were chatting last night was when you were in retreat, it was your first ever retreat.
Yes.
But you felt that you were more total in
Right.
opening up your
Yeah.
humanness, and that
Yes.
somehow you felt was a key to what.
This is actually what I would call a key to awakening. How does one bring that on upon oneself? And I noticed two things during that 7-day retreat. I was so much more open and vulnerable than anyone else in the retreat. I'm not sure why that was. It wasn't normal for me, but I just found myself being very, very open and honest about my humanness, all my perceived failings, all my judgments of myself, all my feelings of inadequacy or unworthiness. Whatever was there, I was willing to really share in a very open way, much more than anyone else. And yet at the same time, I noticed, I didn't know what it was at the time, but I noticed I was becoming more and more present, even though I didn't know what that was then. But I was able to see auras around trees, and everything was becoming a little more mystical to me. And so it's that combination of becoming more and more present, which in my view opens you to your godliness, and that godliness coming into interaction with your humanness. It's that willingness to be incredibly honest about your humanness that seems to me to be one of the keys to true awakening.
And was that easy for you to do at that time?
No, not at all. I'll give you one example. At one point I put my hand up in the group. It was a fairly small group. And I wanted to confess that I judged myself very harshly. I wanted to share that with the group. Nobody else was doing that, but I thought I would share that. So the group leader knew that I had been a lawyer in the past. So he said, well, why don't you prosecute yourself and we'll be the judge and jury. The group would be the jury. This was actually a very important moment in my life. So I prosecuted myself harshly, very harsh judgments upon myself. I really did a very good case. I had a good case going. And at the end of presenting my case, resting my case, I said I rest my case. And the jury came back with a verdict that reduced me to weeping. The verdict was, not only do we find you not guilty, but we love you.
Huh.
And it just melted my heart. Somehow, years of judgments, judging myself or feeling judged, just melted away. And it was very, very life transforming. It was very, very profound for me and very life transforming.
Yeah, there's something about this being able to be totally honest about yourself in the right environment, obviously.
Absolutely.
That is very liberating, isn't it?
It is. In fact, one of the lines in one of my books reads very simply, your gift to God is honesty. God's gift to you is truth. For me, that's a really good deal.
God's gift to you is truth.
Right.
Yeah.
But our gift to God is honesty.
Yes.
Just to be honest,
Yes.
be open, be authentic, stop hiding, stop judging. This is who I've become on my long journey over many lifetimes, living in a world where no one is present. This is who I've become. It's not the truth of who I am, but it's who I've become on that long journey through time and separation.
Yeah, and unfortunately in society today we're more and more encouraged to be somebody, to have an image, if you like.
To present a false image,
Yes,
really,
a false
and to hide
image,
who
yeah.
we really are.
Yes.
Because if they see who I really am, they'll judge me, they won't like me, they'll reject me, then I'll feel alone, which brings me back to that feeling of being separate, which is too painful. And so
Yes.
we humans do anything to escape that feeling of separation, the pain of separation.
Yes.
So that was one of the things that contributed to my first awakening, there's no doubt about it. Another thing that I thought was very intriguing at the time was one of the guys in the group. We were sitting in a circle, there were about 10 of us from the group, and he wanted to read a passage from a book, one paragraph. He read it. This is very strange, I have to admit. He read it and I just started crying once again. I was obviously crying a lot during that retreat. I started crying, but I didn't know what he'd read, so I asked him to repeat it. And he repeated it. I started crying again, but I still didn't know what he'd read. I couldn't recall it. This happened about 5 times where I was asking him to read it again. Still didn't get it. Same response, crying. So he took me over to I took him over to a tree, just the two of us, by a tree, and I asked him to read it very slowly. And suddenly I could get what the passage meant. And it was so strange and so simple, but I think many people would relate to it. I don't remember the exact words, but it was along these lines. There is no greater pain in life than a man being, or a woman, but it was a man being a round peg being forced to fit into a square hole. Somehow that just touched me so deeply. That was me. That was my life. Having to be someone I wasn't. And I'm sure so many people can relate to that. And it really touched me deeply, along with the judgment, prosecution.
Yes.
Those two things. And then, of course, at the end of the retreat, I had this very powerful experience that led to my awakening.
So talk us through that experience.
Well, very briefly, and again, it's very mystical by this time. There was a river just by the retreat centre with a big bank of trees on the other side of the river. And there were rapids in the centre of the river and a swimming hole on the other side of the rapids. So I don't know how this happened. I wasn't doing it, but it was being done to me. But I found myself with my arms outstretched, literally becoming one with the trees. I'd taken the trees into me somehow, became one with the trees. This lasted about 10 minutes. Then I walked into the river where the rapids were, and I defied the rapids. Now normally you can't do that, they were fairly strong, but I had the trees in me, so I was able to do it. Then I swam through the rapids to this deep, dark hole, swimming hole. I found myself again not planning it, but a very deep dive, and then coming out of the water with a primal roar that was heard way downstream. That happened 3 times. Then I swam into the center of the river with the rapids, head down, face first, off I went down the river. I could have so easily been knocked out. Could have been dangerous. About 1/3 of a mile or 1/4 of a mile downriver, the river slowed down, and I stood up, opened my eyes, and I was in a different world. That was how the first awakening came about. I see it as a kind of baptism in a way, a baptism in the water. And I have to stress, I was not doing it. It was somehow being done to me.
So when you say you're in a different world, what form did that different world take?
Well, I opened my eyes. It was the same world, but everything seemed illuminated from within with the presence of God. I was overwhelmed with a sense of oneness. I was overwhelmed. I was literally intoxicated with love. There was no way I could control it. I went for a long walk when I came out of the water. I went for a long walk, and I found myself singing songs of love that I'd never heard before, to the cows, to the trees. I was literally intoxicated with love. It was an amazing experience. And then it gradually settled, but not very much.
And the retreat leader said something important to you, didn't he?
Is that in the book?
Well,
that must be, because
according
I
to
didn't.
your book, the retreat leader said, you can't own anything.
That's right. You have to be of service. You can't own anything.
And it's like what you say is that helped you not to grab hold of the
It helped my
experience.
ego to not get involved in what was happening.
Yes.
So it's like saying, this is not for you. This does not belong to you.
Yes.
But somehow I'd opened up into a very, very strong, awakened consciousness that I'd never experienced before, or even thought about before, or had even imagined before. And to give you one example, the next day at the end of the retreat, I went to get in my car, because I'd driven my car there. I had no clue how to drive it, none. That all the past had been kind of taken from me. I'm sitting in the car not knowing what to do, but slowly, if I turn the key on, put it in neutral, put it in neutral first, turn the key, and push the accelerator, wow, it moved. So it was kind of like that. It was almost like, well, it was like being reborn into a new world.
So was the majority of your memory still there?
I wasn't very involved in that, so I can't really answer that. I was more involved in the mystery of the moment.
Yes.
So my memory wasn't part of my experience, or my future wasn't part of my experience. It was like an utter immersion, but a very mystical immersion into the moment of now, into oneness. But I was also aware that it was a very multi-dimensional experience, so it was quite difficult to manage. It was not orderly. It was a little chaotic, but it just felt so great.
And you also had some revelations in terms of, like, it started a healing process for you.
Yes, the first part of this awakening, after I finished my long walk singing to the cows and the trees, and the birds and the insects, I went through a process of healing. First, it was my own healing. It's as if my past, particularly my early life, was being revealed in front of my eyes, and I could see, that poor boy, what happened to him and how he went astray, and the hurt. No more than normal, just normal pain, normal life experience as a human growing up on this planet or in Australia. But I was kind of taken through a healing of my past. It was very clear to me where I'd gone astray, what had happened to me. But then, after that, I began to receive all sorts of revelations about the human condition. What has happened to humanity? How did we get so lost? Where are we? What caused us to be so lost? How do we come back? That was all being revealed to me during this first awakening, and a lot of that forms the foundation of my teaching today, at least part of it. Also, during this encounter, I think I mentioned to you last night, I had some very interesting experiences with God, because prior to this moment, I was somewhere between atheist and agnostic. Had no interest in God, no interest in the Bible. I'd rejected it all. But then, in the middle of this awakening, I heard a voice. I didn't know whether it was coming from inside or outside of me, but I knew instantly it was the voice of God, and I don't know how I knew that. And prior to that moment, I was an atheist or agnostic. But the voice of God was asking me to do something which was extremely strange to me. God was asking me to tell the truth about Jesus, to which I replied, but I don't know the truth about Jesus. I really don't, and I didn't. So that continued for several days. God kept asking me, tell the truth about Jesus. I kept replying, no, and even if I did know the truth, I wouldn't tell. But I discovered, that was my first encounter with God, and I discovered this is not the God of the Bible that I'd rejected. This is an unconditional presence, an unconditional God, unconditionally loving, accepting. I was allowed to say no. So that was the end of the first awakening, more or less. It took several months to return to normal. But there are another 5 awakenings after that, a total of 6, over a period of about 18 years. So about every 3 years I would have another one of these awakenings, which just opened me more and more to what had happened to us. I also began teaching and working with people one-to-one, one-on-one, which also informed my teaching, and it was out of those awakenings and working with people that this teaching evolved into its current form.
And you also talk in the book about these periods of integration that were very important.
Right.
So, and I think you even, I made some notes from our dinner last night about after you got back home from the first awakening, you were really unable to have a conversation about yourself.
That was actually before I went home. That was at the centre.
Okay.
And then I was taken to be cared for. I didn't go back to Melbourne.
Yes, so someone had to look after you for a time.
I needed people to look after me
yes.
for a period of time.
Yeah.
What had happened again, during the retreat? No, I don't think I'll mention that. Let's continue.
Yeah. So
I don't want you to have to edit it out.
But what interests me though is the nature of the integration.
Okay.
Because let me give that a kind of a wider context. A lot of people watching this, they may not have had the drama of the experience that you had,
right,
but they have changes in their lives, and that integration is so important because it's so easy to try and go back to the kind of part of the normal before. And integration, of course, is about allowing for something new.
Right. I would say that integration is essential for anyone who's had a powerful kind of awakening, because the awakening is one thing, and it's usually a transcendent experience. It's a peak experience, and like all experiences, it passes. So the question is, who experienced that? Who is experiencing that awakening as it's happening? And for me, the answer to that is I am. Right? That's the awakened state, the awakened dimension, the I am presence. I am that. I am. So after the awakening, that what you awaken to never goes away, but it doesn't mean you can stay with it. So you have to go through a process of integrating what awakened within you in your day-to-day living, which really just involves applying what was revealed to you as you go through your life. And slowly, slowly, it all comes together and you find yourself much more in alignment with what you had awakened to. But it takes time, and people shouldn't think, oh, I had this powerful awakening, therefore it's all done. No, there's a process of integration. Otherwise, you will remain slightly separate from that which you awakened to. But as you go through the integration, whatever you experience in that peak experience integrates within this being here. It doesn't have to be a separate, powerful, special experience. It becomes a part of who you are. Your consciousness, your thoughts, your feelings, everything comes into alignment with that.
Can you give an example of a detail of integration that kind of was important to you?
Well, just a very ordinary example would be, if I'm going for a walk and it starts raining, right? One's initial response is, oh, damn, it's raining. Whereas with the awakening process, with the level of acceptance you experience, there's just not that same reaction. Okay, it's raining. Do I have an umbrella? It's kind of relaxed. And that's just a very simple example.
So it's like acceptance to a large degree.
That has a lot to do with it, and a recognition of when you're out of alignment with what awakened within you. So if I find myself comparing with someone, for example, immediately I would notice that and know that that's not this. So you don't reject it, you don't judge it, but slowly, slowly you disengage from, say, comparing, judging, blaming, whatever might be our normal behaviors and reactions. You slowly disengage from it, and slowly, slowly you come into alignment with that which you awaken to.
It seems to me that it's a lot of small details with the integration. It
just takes a period of time where you really are watching who you are as you live your life, and bringing it into alignment with what you awaken to.
Yeah.
And slowly, slowly, what you awaken to becomes part of you. It's like it's not something you remember, it's something you are as you integrate the awakened state of consciousness.
So I think this first period of integration took about 3 years, and then you went back to the retreat center again.
This time I was teaching.
You were teaching a retreat, yeah.
I had a second awakening at the end of that retreat. And I don't want to go into a lot of detail, but in that second awakening, I had all those revelations about Jesus that I told you about last night. And, it was profound, it was unsettling. The revelations that I received about Jesus, particularly on the cross, on that moment when he cried out, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? And the time leading up to that. The revelations that I'd received were so different and so out of alignment with traditional Christian beliefs that it was a little unsettling for me to recognize that. But it seemed so true, it seemed so authentic. And it tied in with what God asked me to do in the first awakening, which was tell the truth about Jesus. In the second awakening, the truth about Jesus was being revealed to me for the first time. After that awakening, after that experience, I read the New Testament for the first time, and it was so interesting to read the Gospels, because it's as if I knew what he really said, what Jesus really said, and what he didn't say, and what's been manipulated and what's been twisted. But in a very strange way, what was revealed to me about Jesus, place him at a higher perspective and a higher level than the Christians have him at. And what I could say is he truly was the Lamb of God, but in a totally different way than people realize.
Okay. And there's something that I picked up myself, which, again, you mentioned in the book, that during that second awakening, you were in a state of perfect silence. So what's a state of perfect silence?
No mind, no thought, just here. Utterly present, present with what is here. That's the awakened state. Any moment you're truly present with something that's here in the moment with you, you are an awakened being. At least for those moments that you're truly present. When you get caught back into the mind, into that world of the past and future, then you're no longer an awakened being. We need to see the mind and the ego will never recognize, nor it will accept the simplicity of presence as being the awakened state. The ego will say, I want more than this, there must be more, I'm looking for the big bang, and that's such a trap. Even those of us who have had really big bang awakening experiences, including myself, but there are many who have had those big bang awakening experiences, we all finish up at the same place. Whether it's Buddha, Jesus, Ramana, or anyone else, we all finish up in the same place, which is here, now. That's it. That's what it means to be awake. You're fundamentally established in presence. You know that the present moment is your true home. This is where you live. You still have a mind. You can still think whenever you want, but now you think consciously, intentionally. You can play in the world of time, which is the past and future. Anything outside of this moment is the world of time. You can play in the world of time, but you no longer get lost there because you know where the truth is. And you just don't forget anymore. You don't lose it. Even playing in the world of time, going out, having fun with friends, going to a movie, going for a walk, whatever you want to do. You can play as much as you like. You can share your thoughts with your friends, share stories, no problem. As long as you know where the truth is and you don't forget, you don't lose it. You don't lose your connection with being present. You know how to come back very easily into presence. That for me is more than awake enough to transform life here on earth.
So you become the master of the mind rather than the servant of the mind.
Exactly. And there's a process in my teaching. I share a two-step path of awakening. I used to call it a two-step dance of awakening, but either one is fine. But step one is learning the art of being present, settling into presence, relaxing into presence, deepening into presence, becoming more and more grounded in presence. That's step one. And ironically, step one is not a process. You can only be present now. You can't be present a moment from now. You can't be present a moment ago. You can only be present now. And I show people in this teaching how to be present simply, easily, instantly. And people start to recognize how simple it is, how easy it is to be present. What's all the fuss about? The problem is not being present. The problem is remaining present. As you live your life, you go to work, you have your relationships, you've got the kids, whatever it is you're dealing with in your day-to-day life. It's so easy to be caught back into that world of the mind, which is, I think, what you were speaking about a little while ago. So easy to be caught back into that story, that dream. Everything outside of this moment is your story, your dream, the world of the mind. So easy to be caught back there. So in order to be truly awakened, you need two elements. One is you need to be fundamentally grounded in presence. And the second element is you need to be a master of your mind and ego so that you're no longer involuntarily pulled out of presence or involuntarily blocked from being present. It's very important, and this is step two. Step two involves bringing conscious awareness to all the ways you're pulled out of presence. How did that happen? What are the hooks still in you that enable that to happen? What is unhealed from your past that is keeping you in your story, in your past? What is the role of the ego in separating you and keeping you away from presence? How do you lose yourself in others? There are a number of aspects to the second step. If you follow these aspects, it will lead to mastery of the mind and ego. Now, step 2 is a process. Your life becomes your teacher, as long as you know how to look into the mirror that is your life, or the mirror that is your relationships, reflecting to you, oh, this is how I get lost, oh, this is what triggers me, this is what catches me into the past, this is what's unhealed, oh, this is how my ego functions. There's quite a lot involved in step 2, but I've made it very, very simple. Just 4 things to watch out for. The resistance of the ego, denial of who you have become, repressed feelings, and losing yourself in others. They're the 4 elements that, if you're really familiar with them, which doesn't take long, it will guide you to a level of mastery of your mind and ego, which will set you free, which is the whole point of our journey. The whole point of our journey is to free ourselves from the story.
So who's the one that's directing the process? Who's the one's becoming the master of the mind?
Well, I would say first that would be God. And I don't mean to speak of God in any religious way. So for me, when I use the word God, I can't help it. I have to. There's no way I can avoid that word because of my experience, in the first and other awakenings. But for me, in a very subtle way, the only thing that God wants of any of us is that we should awaken from our dream and truly be here, really be here. Then we'll open up to a whole new level of purpose in our being here. It's so profound, it's so mysterious, it's so amazing. The only thing you can really say is wow. Once it starts to open up for you, you start to recognize who you are and what you're doing here. So initially, it's God orchestrating your life, trying to get you to a point where you might make a choice to awaken. So that's one level, God. The other level is the awakened dimension is ever present within you. You've always been a fully awakened being. You always will be, you always have been. So to some degree that becomes involved as it perceives, as it begins to sense the stirrings of a light shining through the darkness of the human mind. That would be one aspect. And then at a later stage the soul gets involved, because the soul, the ego is longing for someone to be here for it, for you. The ego is longing, is working on someone being here for you, getting you the love you need, getting it thinks you need, getting you the acceptance, proving that you're good enough, all of these things. But the soul's longing is quite different. The soul's longing is to come home, but the soul doesn't know where home is. So as you find your way out of this past and future world of illusion, this past and future world of separation, as you find your way out of that world of separation and you start to come into the present moment, it starts to feel like home. And the soul starts to recognize, oh, I think he's on the right track. This is interesting. The soul starts to engage, because that's the soul's longing, is homecoming, which really means a return to oneness, a return to God. But the soul doesn't know where home is. So you're going to have to be the champion of the soul as well as the champion of God. You're going to have to find the way upon behalf of the soul. If you can liberate yourself in this lifetime from the story you've been lost in for many, many, many lifetimes, if you can liberate yourself from that story and find yourself fundamentally established within the present moment, then you could declare to God and your soul, it is accomplished. At last I am at home. I am at home in the world of now. God, it is accomplished.
But you see, many people, and I know you must realize this from your work, many people find it's not an easy path. The dark night of the soul is the way it's often expressed, that someone has an opening or has the feeling to follow a path which is different from their normal life.
Right.
And they hit really difficult times, and then there's real challenges involved. It's not always a process.
No, absolutely, you're right. But a lot of those paths that you're referring to, my guess would be that they haven't applied the first step, which is presence. Because as you start to open into presence, forget the path, forget step 2. As you start to open into presence, it starts to open you into the truth of who you are. And the truth is that I could say this to you, I could say it to anybody viewing this video, I could say it to anyone on the planet who's ever lived. The truth of who you are is that when you are present, you are love, you are acceptance, you are compassion, you are empowered from within, you exist in the realization of oneness. At the very deepest level, you're an eternal being, pure consciousness, beyond form and content. Now, that's the truth of who you are. It's a very attractive picture of who you are that I'm painting here, and I know it to be the truth. Whether somebody knows it or not, I know that's the truth. And that dimension of you is always present. It's here now, it's always been here, and it will always be here. But to the extent that you become absorbed into the world of the human thinking mind, to that extent, which has happened to everyone on the planet, to that extent you disconnect from the truth that is ever present within you. So the whole point of this is that as you become more and more present, there's more love, more compassion, more acceptance, less fear. And so it's much easier to deal with all these things that arise that might have otherwise been really difficult, because you're viewing them from a transcendent perspective. So say it's time for me to liberate a whole lot of anger that's been repressed within me for many years since my childhood. Right? Now, if I don't have a sufficient level of presence awake within me, then all I can do is express the anger, believe in what the anger is saying, and it makes things worse. Maybe dump the anger on other people. I'm stuck with the anger. I'm angry, even if I don't express it. That's one way of doing it. Now, another way is that when you're present enough, you can allow the anger to surface. You can allow it to express in a responsible way that doesn't hurt anyone. But at the same time, as you're allowing it to express, you're present enough to know that the whole thing is from the past, that has nothing to do with the present. So it's just about allowing those repressed feelings to complete their journey through you. The same applies to hurt, sadness, pain. No one can hurt you, ever, unless you have hurt repressed within you from your past, mostly from childhood. Nobody can make you angry unless you have anger repressed within you from your past. This is a little hard for people to accept, because everybody wants to blame everyone else for their misery, but it's not true. Then, of course, there's the aspect of unfulfilled needs. You're not having your needs met, so what are those needs? That's a lot of step 2, bringing everything to consciousness with love, acceptance, and compassion that arises when you are present.
Well, I would say that the prevalent emotion these days, or feeling, is fear and anxiety, which is encouraged by our society. There's so many advertising is built on fear, and that tends to not only be at the top but also way down in feeling. And you can be present. I've done this for myself. I can be present, and yet the feeling there is so strong that it's almost impossible to stay there. And going to the mind is almost a relief, because the mind is a distraction from the feeling. And of course, with a lot of the time, and again I know this for myself, the mind can be an apparent relief from something that is a little bit too much or overpowering.
Yeah, and that's the problem in a way. I mean, you're really identifying where we humans went astray a long, long time ago. The reason we got so caught in the mind, so lost in the mind, is because we chose to think rather than feel way back when the feelings were too strong, whether it's anger, hurt, sadness, pain, unfulfilled needs, or fear. Whatever it was too much for us, and we decided not to stay present and feel what was happening in this moment, because in our past lives there have been some horrifying things that would have been unbearable. So we learned to escape by going into the mind and thinking. The problem is we never came back. And what I'm really trying to convey here is that presence is transcendent of whatever might be occurring within your story. If there's fear in your life, it's because you're in your story. It's fear from the past, or you're projecting into the future. So the more present you are, there's no fear. There's nothing to be afraid of, because you're grounded in the present moment. Unless a tiger is running right at you, then there's no need for fear. It doesn't exist in this moment. It exists in your story. And yes, you're right. Many people have a lot of fear. At the deepest level, it's fear of the unknown, fear of dying, fear of the unknowable. Those three things, that the fear keeps us in that story, in that dream. But what I've discovered over many years of working with people, if you don't know what you're afraid of, you will remain afraid. But the moment from presence you can allow the fear to reveal what the fear is of. So what are you afraid of? The moment people can name the fear, identify the fear, express it, it kind of dissolves. And again, this is, for me, one of the benefits of opening into presence, because number one, you're much more in touch with your feelings as you feel them in the moment, and number two, you're not generating feelings that have nothing to do with this moment. So but first you have to go through a process of emptying out those repressed emotions. That's part of the process of awakening. Empty out those repressed emotions, and in this teaching I show people how to do that.
But it can be an apparently endless process.
Not in my world, not according to this teaching. No, it's quite
so
finite.
You have a sort of fast track.
Well, in a way, yes. Like, for example, with anger, I teach people the anger meditation. I'm not going to go into all the details here, but it's about expressing the anger in a certain way and allowing it full expression, allowing it to be all that it wants to be. Anger's been repressed for a long time. It needs your help. It needs your creativity to help it really fully bubble up and express and do what it wants to do, say what it wants to say. So the healing will occur when you hit anger's right note. And anger's right note, you know you've hit anger's right note when anger is so absurd, so ridiculous, so over the top that you start laughing. You recognize the ridiculous nature of anger. And how I describe it is, somebody didn't say hello to me when I walked in. They didn't smile and say hello. They die. That's anger. Most of us don't recognize what anger really is. It's a response to hurt. If anybody hurts you, the most immediate response is to go to anger. But then we have to keep the anger buried because it's irrational, it's unreasonable. For the slightest hurt, we want to inflict severe punishment. Now, you don't recognize the truth of what I'm saying until you actually have that experience of doing the anger meditation and you hit the right note and you start laughing. And by the way, as I'm talking to you right now, you are dissolving into light, just to let you know, which indicates to me that I'm very present with you, but you are also very present with me as I'm speaking. And
yes, of course I'm present with you.
Yes, I know.
Because I'm interviewing you, and,
Yes.
and for me that...
But it's the dissolving
normal.
into light that
Yeah.
gives me a clue as to
Yeah.
the level of presence.
I think what also interests me, Leonard, is this, and it's become more and more talked about, and books about it the last few years, is the trauma that's in the cells. It's emotions, experiences we're not even aware of.
Very true.
And whether, I've never really been into past lives as such, whether it's past lives or it's a consensus thing that we pick up because of our interconnectedness, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
There's a part of us, there's a part of everything in us. That's what more and more is becoming apparent, whether it be through advanced physics
Right.
or psychology. And so it's almost as like we're a hologram
Right.
of everything else. And it seems to me that with your work, there must be an element. It's not just a personal clearing. It's not just a personal liberation. If we really do the work, then somehow it's freeing up the environment as well. it's freeing up the other as well.
Absolutely. In fact, what I say is every moment you're truly present in your day-to-day life, every moment you're truly present, it's like dropping a tiny, tiny pebble of light into a dark, dark pond of human unconsciousness, ripples of light. In my view, that's how we're going to make a profound shift in human consciousness, by enough of us dropping those tiny pebbles of light into the dark pond of human unconsciousness. And when we reach a critical mass, when there's enough people actually taking that step into true awakening, it's going to impact human consciousness at many levels. It is right now. So that's our best hope, in my view.
How do we know, or maybe it's not important to know, but I still have the question there. How do we know what's really us in terms of our personal journey and our repressed emotions? And how do we know what is the one which we're a part of and somehow is coming through us?
Well, for me, the answer is by being present, because first of all, a number of things happen as you become present. If you push down on water, there's going to be a displacement, right? As you push down something down on water, it displaces. And it's the same with presence. As you become more and more present, it's almost like a displacement happening where it starts to push up whatever's unresolved, unhealed within you, whatever is not of presence. So if you have feelings repressed within the body, say anger or hurt, as you become more present, which is an embodied state, presence is an embodied state, it means you're coming more and more into the body, then you're going to encounter what's repressed within the body, and presence will start to bring it up. So the question is, how do you deal with that as it comes up? And step 2 deals with that, answers that question. Step 2 of this teaching. So we have to know how to deal with stuff as it's coming up. It doesn't have to be difficult, and it doesn't have to take a long time. But what is a prerequisite is sufficient presence that you can view whatever's coming up and relate to whatever's coming up, but not get lost in it. You realize, wow, this is all from my story. In my story, I don't feel good enough. In my story, I don't feel loved. In my story, I'm looking for acceptance. In my story, I'm looking to prove myself good enough. This is all in the story. It has nothing to do with the truth of who you are. And as you open into presence, you literally are coming more and more back to yourself. There's no more entanglement in others. I am me, you are you. Everyone out with your expectations, your needs, your judgments, your opinions. Everyone out. I'm me, you're you. And slowly, we come back to ourselves, and then what we discover is the oneness that you're referring to actually emerges from the center, not from out there. It emerges from the center. That's where the oneness consciousness is. It's at the very heart of silence, at the center of your being. Also, that's where God is, as eternal, infinite silence, pure consciousness, the source from which everything arises and into which everything returns. So now, of course, as it starts to open up from the center, then of course you start to experience the oneness in everything around you, the oneness with the flowers. You and I can experience a very clear, deep sense of oneness as we become more and more present together. With or without words, it really doesn't matter, as long as we're present throughout. So my sense of it is that's what we're doing here, that's why we're here, that's our true destiny, is to awaken into the truth of who we really are.
Yeah, it takes... I lived in this community several years ago. Gosh, it was many years ago. I hate to think how long ago it was. And it was very much about being present.
Yes.
And there was all kinds of techniques, and we'd have a bell which someone would ring, and you had to freeze for a minute and just stop what you were doing and just be here. And the encouragement was always you open the door, you feel the door handle, you go up the stairs, you feel the banister.
Exactly.
You're with someone in an intimate way. It's kind of seeing how you feel and how your body feels. It was really down to a lot of basic hard work in terms of just taking everyday situation. You take the glass and you fill the glass and you fill the liquid. And even then it took a long time to get the hang of it somehow.
Well, that was a few years ago, right?
And you're saying everything's speeded up.
Well,
I know I'm playing a little devil's advocate
that's okay.
here.
But for me anyway, everything's definitely speeded up big time. For me, it's as simple as, I notice I'm thinking. Well, that's okay. I'm allowed to think. I can keep thinking if I want. Or, I notice I'm thinking. Now I'm present. It's instant. The moment I notice I'm thinking and instantly I intend to be present with something that's here, it's instant. There's no gap. So now I'm present with the flower. Now I'm present with the paper on your lap. It's too simple. Everything is already here. The glass, this glass of water is of the present moment. It's not something I'm remembering or imagining. It's actually here. So this brings you the opportunity to be present with it. So you could notice you're in the mind. That's okay. But if you choose, just be present with this. Now, the moment you're present with this glass, if you're truly present with it, you will come out of the mind, out of the past and future, out of the story, out of the dream, instantly, because now you're present. The thoughts are past, future, so the thoughts will stop. The mind, the world of the mind is past, future, so you come out of the mind because now you're present. It's too simple. You can be present with a flower, with a glass.
But there's also a lingering something.
That's why we need step 2. You're absolutely right.
The lingering something is to do with the practicalities that need to be worked through.
In this moment,
the 4 steps of the practicalities.
No. In this moment, just this moment all by itself, there are no practicalities to attend to. Not this moment. Not this moment.
There's a lingering feeling, though.
What's the lingering feeling?
Well, with me, it's often unease. And it's not necessarily identifiable. It's not necessarily a huge issue. But there's, one of the things that, intrigued me, and my notes have almost become redundant now, but there's one thing I wanted to read out, which is relevant to what we're talking about here, if I can find it, as your second awakening. I've already asked you that one, about the state of the perfect silence, and then something else happened where, another awakening where, I don't look at my notes and find it, but you were totally there and there was nothing else.
Right.
And I understand that can happen, but for most of us, we can be present and we can be aware, and there's a degree of awareness,
right,
of being present and aware, and there's something else that's also there that doesn't give or doesn't end up with a perfect silence. Not to say that it's imperfect, but it is the way it is.
No, I understand what you're saying, but let's just take your example that you mentioned before, a very subtle feeling of unease.
Yes.
So what I would suggest with that is very simple. Okay, if you have a very subtle feeling of unease, if I had that, I would be very committed and devoted to, first of all, being present with my body and present with what's here, but I'd also choose to be very present with that feeling of unease. And I would encourage that feeling of unease to express itself. What are you uneasy about? Feeling of unease. I'd let the uneasy feeling reveal to me what it's uneasy about, because the minute you recognize what it is, then you have that opportunity and choice to make a shift around whatever's causing that unease. So again, it comes back to, by being present, you're more in touch with your feelings, and your feelings you actually come into right relationship with your feelings. So if I had a feeling of unease in my body, and I asked that feeling of unease to express itself, that feeling would express itself through me, because it knows that I'm welcoming the feeling. There's a right relationship here with the feeling. It feels welcomed, it feels included, I'm present with it, I'm attending to it, I'm not thinking there's something wrong with it. And then suddenly it will cooperate with me and it'll deliver its message, because mostly feelings are here to deliver a message. We're meant to listen to the message, and then we can respond appropriately. So for me, that would just be an opportunity, a feeling of unease.
Well, I completely understand that, and it kind of, in a way, it kind of supports what I'm feeling, or my experience is that being present, there's often a lot going on.
There's what?
A lot going on. I can be present, but if I'm really present, not only is the sounds,
Right.
what I see,
Yeah.
there's sensations from the body,
Yes.
there's emotions. Even being present, there might be a thought that comes and goes. It's just, as you say, you don't dwell on the thought. But it's a busy, I kind of want to somehow dispel the myth that being present, everything is wonderful, everything is silent,
saying,
because
right.
it's a myth. It's not reality for most people. Being present, not only is it hard work to get there.
Wrong. I have to dispute that.
Well, okay, it's hard work to stay there.
That's better.
That's what you said. It's
Yeah.
hard work to stay there.
Yes.
And you've got to, there's this famous story, was it at Spensky? Or was it Bennett? When he was going out on a self-awareness exercise, he goes out of his door, and Spence being one of Gurdjieff's principal disciples, he goes out the door and says, "I'm now in a self-remembering exercise." Then he remembers 3 days later.
Right.
He started off on this exercise. It's not always easy.
Well,
Simple, but not easy.
let me put it this way. First of all, everyone should at least know that they have a choice. For me, that's the responsibility of people like me and you to let people know that they have a choice. They can continue living within the mind with all the limitations and problems and unease of that. And there's reasons why it's so difficult living within that world of the mind. They need to know they have a choice, that there's another way of existing on this earth, and that is more fundamentally present. Now, to be present is really, presence exists on a vertical axis, so that you can be present here, which is kind of lightly present, superficially present, but you're still somewhat present. You're not lost in the story, lost in the mind, lost in thought. There's a certain level of presence where you can still remember your past, you can imagine your future, you can participate in the world of time, you can play in the world of time, but at this level, you don't really get lost there. You don't get lost in that world of not here, right? But as you become more and more finely attuned to presence, you cross a point, and then you're in the timeless dimension, the oneness, the presence of God in all things present, heaven on earth. That's in everyone. That's available to everyone. I don't care how difficult it is, and I don't consider it very difficult. Why wouldn't people pursue that? It's a much greater outcome for the individual than climbing Mount Everest. That's not easy. What would you rather do? Climb Mount Everest, or climb the inner Mount Everest and discover the truth of who you are, the truth of love, the truth of why you're here, the truth of God? I just don't get why people wouldn't be falling over themselves to find that dimension within themselves. But it's essential that we know the way, capital W, the way of awakening. It doesn't say the old ways, and I include Buddha and Jesus in that, the old ways don't seem to be working very effectively. For example, Buddhist monks and nuns. For the most part, I'm not saying all of them by any means, but for the most part, they're caught up in Buddhist theory, Buddhist ritual, and Buddhist practice, which will actually act as an obstacle to them realizing their Buddha nature. What I say to Buddhists is, don't be a Buddhist, be a Buddha. That was the whole point of Buddha's visit to this earth. Don't be a Christian, be a Christ. But if you declared that to Christians, they'd call you a heretic. How can you declare yourself a Christ? But Christ consciousness, Christ is a state of consciousness. Jesus, the man, awakened to Christ consciousness, awakened consciousness. Gautama awakened to Buddha consciousness, and that is in each one of us. It's just awakened consciousness, which simply means I'm here, rather than lost in some dream, some illusion made up of remembered of past memories and future imaginings. That's all the world of the mind is, together with all our theories, our ideas, our concepts, our beliefs. And if you're willing to do whatever it takes, if it's difficult, like you say, right, so what? What's the problem? Don't be a baby.
Well, I look at it a bit different insofar as...
What's that?
I look at it a bit different insofar as it's something doesn't work, it's unintelligent to keep doing the same thing.
Agreed.
And one of the things you said at the end of our dinner last night,
Mm-hmm.
which I wrote down as a possible title for this program,
Yes.
decide later, Path of Champions. Champions, the best we've just had in Europe. We just had the Champions League final
Right.
for football, and it's that's the best. Well, I know it's Europe. It's probably best in the world, the best players in the world, and the best players in the world have the most talent. They have the most discipline. They have the most determination, and they're probably in their own way. And if you watch some of them, they're really in presence a lot of the time.
Of course,
because what they're
yes.
doing is
Right.
superhuman. It's
They
not
don't
like,
have time to think.
exactly.
Right.
And some of them even took. There was a Ronaldinho. He's not playing now. He talked about that when he'd take a free kick, about he was completely present with the ball.
Right.
So some of them talk about it.
And the chances of the ball going through the goals when you're present is much higher than when you're thinking.
Well, I think
Even
that's very
playing
true.
tennis, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
If you're silent and present playing tennis, your game will be or golf, your game will be much better.
Yeah. So I really like this phrase you came up with, Path of Champions.
It is.
Because champion is to be the best, it's to be the winner. And okay, in the world of non-duality, there isn't really a winner and a loser,
Right.
but it's winning because you're coming out of the rut, you're coming out of the unconscious, basically.
Right, right. And for me, the path of champions really implies those with the courage to encounter themselves at every level, including those aspects of themselves they'd rather not face. First thing I say to people when I begin an event is, who's in hiding? Who's hiding various aspects of themselves? Who's hiding that they're a blamer, or they're guilty, or they're controlling, or they're judgmental? Who's hiding all of those things? And then I say, well, if you don't come out of hiding, you cannot awaken. It's not possible. You have to be willing to own, acknowledge, confess, and reveal who you've become living in a world where no one is truly present, given the circumstances of your childhood, the relationship you had with your parents, the circumstances of your early years. Who have you become? Because who you've become is radically different than the truth of who you are. As I said earlier, the truth of who you are when you're present is love, acceptance, compassion, true power, oneness, all of that. You're an eternal being, pure consciousness. That's really beautiful. I mean, I know that's the truth of who you are, and I know that's the truth of everyone watching this video. I know who you are. But then the question becomes, okay, who have you become? Living lifetime after lifetime in the world that we live in, with so much unconsciousness, so much judgment, cruelty, abuse. No one is present. Who have you become? So then, I ask, well, who's become judgmental? Hands go up. Who's become a blamer? Hands go up. Guilty, controlling, a victim, unworthy, unloved. Who feels unloved? And it all comes from childhood. So that's really the beginning of opening into the truth, because there's what I call one of the laws of God. I really know this to be true. If you deny who you've become, also if you hide, judge, try and fix who you've become, you will be denied the truth of who you are. On the other hand, if you're willing to go through a process over time of looking into the mirror that is your life, your relationships, and start to own, acknowledge, confess, and reveal who you've become, it will open the door to the truth of who you are. It's one of the primary keys to awakening. The other key that is essential is to so clearly recognize the distinction between when you're truly present and when you're in the mind, the ego, the story, the dream. How do you know the difference? What's the difference? What's the test? Is there a test? And the answer is yes, there's a test. When you're truly present, your mind is silent and you feel utterly here with what is here. Everything else is the mind and ego. Even spiritual thoughts, intelligent thoughts, good thoughts. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with those thoughts. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the mind or ego. I'm saying we need to be able to recognize which is which so we don't get confused. Because for the most part, once you've had a few awakenings, it gets absorbed into the mind, and the mind starts thinking it's awake. The ego starts thinking it's enlightened. Very hard to wake up an enlightened ego. Very difficult.
Yeah.
You need a big Zen stick for that one.
Okay, we need to finish in a couple of minutes. Is there any kind of thing you want to say to round the program off?
Just that I wish everybody knew that they had that choice to be more present in their lives or to be fundamentally present. And it's not enough to know that you have that choice, but you have to know how to apply yourself in a way that gives you that choice, so you can exercise that choice whenever you want. In other words, I notice I'm in my mind. How do I become present? I notice my anger has been triggered. I'm triggered by something that just happened. How do I release myself from that anger or that hurt? Come back to presence. What is the way? How do we become present in the first place? So not only, I'd love people to know that they have that choice. Everyone has that choice. It's a God-given right to be present. But now, how do we exercise that choice so that we become fundamentally present? That would be my concluding words, apart from the fact that I've enjoyed sitting here with you and I've enjoyed your presence and your questions. So thank you.
Thank you, Leonard.
Yes.
Thank you for coming on to Conscious TV. I'll show you your latest book again, Journey Into Now. Say for now, Journey Into Now. And Leonard, of course, does workshops. He's travelling at the moment around the world, so maybe you get to spend some time with him if you want to, somewhere near where you live.
And you can visit my website, leonardjacobson.com.
Great. Okay, and thank you for watching Conscious TV, and I hope we see you again soon. Goodbye.